Welcome to Imaginative Visions Journeys, where creators from the entertainment world discuss their journey to turning their dreams into reality. With your host, Justin D. Williams.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Imaginative Visions Journeys. Also, this will be on the talkersofgeeks.com. Justin here, and today we have author Sean O'Connell. Welcome. How you doing today?
I'm great, man. Good to be with you.
And we're here to talk with Sean about his new book, With Great Power Comes Great Responsibility. And this is just an amazing book. Sean, before we get into Navy, can you talk a little bit about what the book's about for our viewers here? Because obviously, with great power comes great responsibility. We know it has something to do with Spider-Man.
It certainly does. Yeah. So Spider-Man's been my favorite character since forever. And, it's probably coming to an end of it, but we've been in for a while what I think is this golden age of comic book movies and superhero films and comic book adaptations. And I really do believe that over the course of that time, Spider-Man has been one of the most influential, in terms of like shaping the way that these stories are told, going back to the Raimi films and transitioning over into Mark Webb's movies and studios trying to figure out how to build larger universes and then just the way that Sony shares the character with Disney is historic. So there's so many stories from a movie perspective, from a movie making perspective that I thought you could tell around Spider-Man, that even if fans, love the movies and thought that they knew some of this stuff, I wanted to be able to put it together into one big compilation and then, also explore some of the things that led him up to the Raimi film, some of the failed attempts, trying to get a Spider-Man movie off the ground. And so I kind of told his history. And as I was doing it, we were building towards No Way Home, which I didn't even realize was going to be this culmination, of the three generation of Spider-Man coming together. So the timing of it turned out to be pretty wild.
And let's get into the beginning of the origins. Like, since you are a huge Spider-Man fan, I am too, my favorite Marvel superhero. What really inspired you to really start off to just not to focus on the comics, but the live action adaptations of it, of his journey?
Well, I found them to be fascinating because just translating any superhero essentially from the page to the screen is really, really complicated. When you think about, going all the way back to like figuring out how to make Christopher Reeve convincingly fly, to, with Batman, you get Tim Burton trying to translate his interpretation of Gotham, and then someone like Christopher Nolan comes around and makes it look more like a Chicago, New York type thing. When Raimi took on Spider-Man, like the thing about Spider-Man is that it's not a fictionalized universe, it's New York City, and there's so many people who are extremely familiar with it, and here you are dropping a character with these incredible powers into a world that we recognize. And I was always fascinated by the process that people had to do in order to make him look the way that he does in real life. And then you watch the evolution of the Raimi films, and then you look and see how different it looks for Andrew Garfield by the time he gets his chance. And I just feel like the visual effects and the people working on those movies, it became more sophisticated over the years. And so from somebody who studies film and really, gets into sort of the nuts and bolts geekiness of like, how did you guys do that? Like, I wanted to figure out how people did that for Spider-Man.
And you didn't just touch on the films too, because like you just alluded, you touched on the previous before it even got to the films. And we're talking about the Spider-Man TV shows, of course, Japanese Spider-Man, and it just, which I thought would have been great if he just appeared once in No Way Home. But there's been so much adaptations. Do you have a particular, I know this is like probably choosing your favorite song, but do you have a favorite adaptation? Me is definitely I grew up with Toby, so I'm a little biased to the Toby era. I think Spider-Man 2 to me is just like the pinnacle definitive Spider-Man film. But do you have a favorite one where if you had to choose, if one of them has to be top dog?
It's so hard. So my answer is probably Into the Spider-Verse, which is a cheat because of the number of different Spider-Men that are featured in there. But specifically, the one that I love the most inside Into the Spider-Verse is early in the film, Chris Pine's interpretation of Peter Parker.
Yeah.
For some reason, just his delivery and of those sarcastic jokes that he's making, and it's a very brief segment, but that the way that he was reading Spidey's jokes and the way that he was like, shooting one-liners back at the villains, I was like, that's how I hear Spider-Man in my head. Like that was the voice that I associated with Spider-Man.
Mhm.
I love that Into the Spider-Verse has turned an entire new generation. My wife works in elementary education, and she says that she sees Spider-Man every day. She sees Spider-Man on backpacks, on T-shirts,
Yeah.
on lunchboxes. But it's Miles. But I love the fact that it's Miles Morales, like that he's the one who is introducing this whole new generation of young fans to Spider-Man. And while Peter Parker is always going to be my guy, having Miles be that person for a new generation is just amazing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, even like I wasn't really truthfully a huge fan of Miles because I'm always like I'm old school Peter, but like Into the Spider-Verse got me into him, and even the reading the Death of Peter Parker comic where he was really introduced, like when he really kind of took the mantle, and then the Spider-Man PS4 game really solidified me being like a Miles fan. Just the way they told his story and incorporated with Peter's mentorship. I thought that was well done. But let's talk a little bit about the process of writing this book, because this has to take like it's over 300 pages, and you're detailing it from the chronicles of the early stages of Spider-Man adaptation, as you said, to all the way to No Way Home. How much research does it take, and how long did it take you to write this?
Between 18 months and 2 years. And it really is what the hardest part was early on, putting together what I thought the table of contents was going to be. I knew that there were a number of stories that I wanted to focus on and sort of laying out how they were going to go together. Now, I was lucky enough that I work at Cinema Blend, and for years I've sort of been writing on those Spider-Man movies, and have been lucky enough to sort of go and speak to a lot of the different people who have been associated with them. I didn't know at the time that in doing all of that stuff, I was kind of doing research and interviews that I was going to be using for a book later, but it helped to have all of that sort of insider knowledge and quotes and stories. Like I was able to go back and pull transcripts from interviews that we did like on the set of Spider-Man Homecoming,
Hmm.
where, Tom Holland is talking about how he was working really hard to make his Peter Parker different from Tobey and Andrew who came before him. And I found all that stuff to be really interesting. But it's a challenge to then take it all and shape it into a narrative, and then to almost make those individual stories connect into a bigger arc. But that's the fun of like writing a book, of sort of putting it together. When you can find a quote that helps you bridge, one point that you're trying to make into another, it's so rewarding when it all clicks together. It can be really frustrating, but I also do find that like, most of that stuff about the Nicholas Hammond stuff from the early TV days, and then doing interviews from people who worked on the Raimi films, I kind of groove on that research, because when they were telling me stories that were making me as a fan super excited, then I was like, oh, people who love Spider-Man are going to love to hear this. So when the book was finished and I was in this waiting period to get it out, I was like, I just can't wait for people to hear these stories. I just think that they're really going to love, what the stories that I got to hear that I can then put into the book and share.
And what would you say was one of your favorite stories that from your book that you put in there?
Well, my favorite chapter, or one of my favorite chapters, is the whole backstory of Andrew Garfield going to San Diego to surprise the fans at Comic-Con, which is, without exaggeration, it's a video that I watch, every 6 months maybe, because his passion for the character, and his love for Spider-Man shines through in that moment, and you can tell how overwhelmed he is just to be able to stand in front of all those people. He's at the early part of his journey. The studio
Hmm.
machine hasn't chewed him up yet and spit him out, and it's so pure. And then I talked to Matt Tolmack, who was a producer on the two Amazing Spider-Man movies, and he gave me the insight, the behind the scenes lead up to that, and how nervous the studio was, to even let him do that, because they were essentially like, what if it bombs? What if the people don't like it? And here, this is his first step as the character. They felt it was a real risk, but they trusted Andrew and believed in him and let him try it. And of course, the rest is history.
And that's to me, that was like when I saw it on YouTube, I was like, oh my God, this is the first actor really like to really to me to really show that passion that he was just walking around Comic-Con. No one knows it's him
Yeah, yeah.
until the actual until he does that little Q&A. He unveils himself and it's just this loud wrestling type of pop that he gets. And I thought that for me, that was just like an amazing, like, wow, this guy really is passionate. And then when he got back to No Way Home, like I
Right.
thought he was the show stealer there.
100%. 100%.
I mean, all credit to Toby and Tom Holland, but my favorite scene in No Way Home is when he said that he got bitter and then he got vengeful and
Right.
he started pulling his punches. And I was just like, I want to see that movie.
Yeah, I know. Because we didn't get to see the continuation
Yeah.
of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. You know, he was supposed to have two movies. They circled dates for two movies for him. And we would have got to see Andrew explore that grief. It does. Amazing Spider-Man 2 ends on a bit of a hopeful note. He has that great interaction with that little kid, you
Yeah.
know, and he kind of accepts the fact that, like, all right, I'm going to be the protector of New York, essentially. So I don't know how much they would have wallowed in it, but No Way Home gave him the right amount of closure, I thought, of being able to admit that the loss, you know, cost him essentially. And here he is trying to pass advice on to a new Peter of just to say, like, I don't want you to become what I became, even for a little bit.
And one thing I also like that you did was that you also touched on the James Cameron, um, what would have been of the Spider-Man. And, I didn't even notice when I was reading it that Sam Raimi took a little bit of that organic Spider-Man idea from the web shooters for him to have it organically. And that was originally more of Cameron's interpretation of it.
Absolutely. And controversial. You know, people still sort of talk about the fact it's funny that it gets made fun of a little bit in No Way Home, you know, with the other two Spider-Men wanting to know so much about Peter. Like that idea, yes, was in James Cameron's original treatment for it. And when Toby, I have some quotes in there from Toby about how he talks about if he's going to get all of the powers of a spider, why wouldn't he also get the ability to shoot a web? Like he shouldn't have to build a mechanical web shooter, even though that is obviously comic origin. The in putting these stories together, one of the things that always fascinated me also is that each of these decisions, each of these potential projects, had they come together, they change history in a way that, you know, people probably don't stop a lot to think about. Like if James Cameron and Leonardo DiCaprio make a Spider-Man movie, they're theoretically going to be on the hook for three Spider-Man movies, right? Because it's going to do really well, and they're going to be signed up just like Raimi was. That prevents, you know, him from doing Titanic. It prevents him from maybe doing True Lies with Schwarzenegger. You know, it doesn't, then you don't get the Raimi films. And then maybe the entire course of superhero comic book movie history alters because you just don't know where you go from that point. And I find those, you know, what if situations to be so interesting. And
Yeah.
you know, you put a name like James Cameron behind it, I find that to be pretty fascinating.
I mean, that would have been we already seen the take with the organic webs, but to see what his vision would have been like, I think if one character I know he would have probably just nailed would have been Doc Ock.
Well, he wanted Schwarzenegger. You know, he wanted Schwarzenegger for it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I mean, it's him, so I know he would probably take a little bit more care than what Schwarzenegger did with Batman and Robin.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think he would have like, no puns, none of. I think he would have probably like toned Arnold down a bit with it, but I kind of could see it with Schwarzenegger back in the day with the crew cut and the glasses. It could have probably worked for the '90s Doc Ock that he was going for.
But Alfred Molina ends up becoming so perfect in that part.
Role, perfectly done. But one thing I also did like about the book, and I'm saying this in my review, is it's like it feels like a history book, but it's a book that you could just keep reading because there's so much information and there's so much unveiled like behind the scenes. Like we even get into, especially in the Amazing Spider-Man chapter when we're focusing on Angel, we get a little bit, glimpses of that process, a little bit of that drama as well. And you even touched on the Sony and Marvel dispute before, when Sony got the rights back to it.
Mhm.
And that I was like, wow, you included this as well. I was like, how did you get this part in before, or before release date? And
I'm telling you, that was, thank God that was only like a chapter or two of it. All that stuff that was happening, and it literally was happening leading up to when I had to turn the final manuscript in. And my publishers even gave me a little bit of leeway where they were like, all right, we can buy you a couple of weeks to shake out how this happens, and especially if it means that you can get a couple of interviews. And I was able to speak with people like Tom Rothman, who's the head of Sony Pictures Entertainment, and get some stuff from Amy Pascal, and just really shake out like what was going to happen post No Way Home. And as we sit here now, you and I, and have this conversation, we still don't know fully what's going to happen with Tom moving
no,
forward. And but I was also like, there's chapters in the book that are dedicated to Sony building out their own Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man, which
yeah,
is odd. The Venom films and Morbius, and they're still going in that direction. We have Craven coming. We have Madam Web,
Web, yeah,
El Muerto, if that actually happens. Like there's, it's another interesting component to me. I thought was that here's a superhero character that is sustaining a cinematic universe that he's not even officially part of.
yeah,
At another universe, there's no other superhero in comic book history that has been able to do that. And
no.
all the more reason why I just figured that putting his history on the page was worth it at this time, knowing that there's still going to be plenty of stories to tell about Spider-Man going forward and the way that he impacts the Hollywood industry. But right now, this really felt like the pinnacle of what he's been able to pull off.
I think especially with the ending of No Way Home, and I said this with my friends on our review as well, is that I think what the ending was brilliant because it's a fail safe for both Marvel Studios and Sony if that ever happens again, to erase Peter from their memory and just keep a Spider-Man there. It's a way of like, hey, we don't decide to play ball. We have that reset. We can continue this story, but no one knows who he is again. So we're back to square one. We can
Yep.
take him out of the MCU, go have him completely in our universe, and no one knows who he is. On the Marvel side is also like, okay, we don't have the rights to Spider-Man yet. We did what we had to do. We erased Peter Parker, but people know that the events still happen because they know that there was a Spider-Man. They just don't know who is that Spider-Man. I thought that was like brilliantly from both studios to be like, okay, we need a way out just in case
Yep.
we need to, we can't play ball anymore.
100%. And people don't realize probably how close we came to Marvel and Sony not playing together before No Way Home. Like when Marvel or Disney essentially said like, hey, we want more profit sharing, we want a bigger stake of the game. And Sony was adamant where they were just like, no, that's okay. We'll just take our ball and go back home. And Spider-Man is ours. And who knows what Spider-Man 3 would have been. There's quotes in the book that John Watts approached Tom Holland and said, hey, it might be a Craven story. I think we might be going in that direction. And it wasn't until, they were able to sort of figure out financially how to do it. And then, of course, they come up with the idea of the multiverse, that it became that much bigger. But there's not a lot in No Way Home that is MCU. Like, yes, you have Doctor Strange, and they allow Charlie Cox to show up as Matt Murdock. But all those other characters, everybody else who's featured in No Way Home is a Sony property. They're all underneath the Sony umbrella. Now, based on the types of movies that we've seen Sony deliver over the years, would it have turned out as well? I don't know. Who's to say? Is it the Kevin Feige magic? Is it, just because the people at Marvel are helping out? Or eventually, when they do just bring Spider-Man back to the Sony universe, are those movies going to be great? I don't know. I think we're going to get to a point where Tom Holland continues to get to be Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there's a separate Spider-Man operating in the world of Morbius and Venom and Madam Web, and maybe it's Miles, maybe it's an older Peter Parker, very similar to what we saw in Into the Spider-Verse. But I think now audiences are savvy enough with the concept of the multiverse of, oh, there's multiple Spider-Men, and you can have one be over on the Sony side without messing up exactly what Tom is trying to do in the MCU.
Which I think will be a smart idea to just either, I just say go with Andrew. That's just me because I rather just
Dude,
them just
same.
give that man his flowers, let him do his 3,
Yep.
And just be done with it. That way we can see the progression of it, and then, or you just use Toby, get Sam. Sam just did Doctor Strange. Let them do the 4, give them their storybook ending. Because you did talk about Spider-Man 4 of what would have been in the
Right.
book as well, which I think was supposed to be the Lizard in that one, right?
Vulture. They were going to do
Oh, the
Vulture, and
Vulture,
it was
yeah,
going to be
Vulture.
John Malkovich, and then
Yeah,
I think
right.
Black Cat would have got introduced as well too. Raimi loves those, Silver Age early Spider-Man villains, and it's why he never really gelled with Venom. He wanted Spider-Man 3 to be a Sandman story, 100%. So
Yeah, the only thing I always joke with people. I was like, they only has 2 Spider. Sam Raimi only did 2 movies. They was like, no, there's a 3. I was like, that doesn't that does not that does not that
yeah,
did not happen.
we do
That has
not
been
talk
Thanos.
about that.
That has been Thanos snapped from me. But yeah, like and you can tell when you're watching 3 that he didn't really have that passion for Venom. And I
Sure.
believe, like, even in the book you was talking about, like how they kind of shoehorned he was, ordered to shoehorn Venom into it. And
Yeah.
he doesn't even know the character that well. So you can really see it's like, how can I do Sandman? How can I do Venom now? I mean, there was a way they could have did it because they introduced Jameson's son in the second one. They could have
Right.
just did, you know, that story and just have him like, hey, he's going up to space for a mission, and that's how Venom would have came in.
Sure.
I thought that would
Well,
have been smarter way to do it.
they still would have cast Topher Grace, and that was the mistake.
Yeah,
How was that Eddie Brock? All due respect to Topher Grace,
yeah.
who's good in several other things, but he's not Eddie Brock.
Yeah, they wanted. I think I remember a long time. I think it was the feature they was talking about. They wanted someone who could mirror Toby, but I was like, that's not Venom. like,
Right.
like, like if
I
you could
know.
have got The Rock at that time, heck, if you would have trained Brock Lesnar to play Brock, it would have been.
Holy cow! Does Eddie not look like Brock Lesnar? That's
Yes, he
amazing.
does.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, you could have got Brock Lesnar, get him some acting classes, don't have him do much, and just let him be that imposing force to be like a really threatening Venom.
Right.
But I mean, it's just like there's so much that you put in this, and I love the fact that you use with great power. That's great responsibility because
Yeah.
obviously Stanley is obviously one of the fathers, him and Steve Ditko, the fathers of Spider-Man, and that theme is still central core. And even in all these movies, even at No Way Home, where they finally said the line, and obviously it wasn't Uncle Ben, it was Aunt May this time. Each Spider-Man iteration, live action or animation from the Spider-Man TSA to Into the Spider-Verse, even with Miles Morales, all of them have that responsibility. So what was your reason behind choosing that particular for the title?
Oh, well, like you said, I mean, like anyone who hears that knows that it's Spider-Man. It's the core of his origin, essentially. And we talk a lot in the book about his relatability, and what makes him special to audiences and to fans is that he either Spider-Man reminds you of yourself in certain elements, or reminds you of somebody that you know. He's relatable is the word. He's not. Amy Pascal says something really great in the book where she's like, he wasn't born a wizard, like Harry Potter. He's not an alien from another planet like Superman. He's a kid, from Queens, who happened to get bit by a radioactive spider. And but at the heart of that is, he always makes a mistake that comes with a lot of consequences, and he has to be reminded that if I don't keep going, if I don't keep fighting, if I ever let my guard down, there's a possibility that someone is going to get hurt, and I'm going to have to live with the consequences of that guilt, essentially. And Daredevil does that a lot too. Like, Daredevil has a lot of Catholic guilt built into his origin, but the idea of this lesson being handed down to Peter by Uncle Ben, shortly before Uncle Ben falls victim to one of Peter's selfish decisions,
Yeah.
is just a genius way to tie together a motivation to keep your hero fighting. Like so many other heroes, even someone like Batman, like, yes, you can talk about the fact that his parents were killed at a very young age and that he sort of fights to clean up Gotham. But after a while, that motivation loses a little bit of steam. But I love the fact that with Spider-Man, it's because he frequently makes decisions that are just like, what if I just did something for myself? Can I just do something for myself just this one time? And then he does, and something catastrophic happens, and then he has to work twice as hard to make up for it. So I love that about him. I think that's such a key element to the character and why I appreciate him. And so I just thought that slogan seemed like the ideal title for the book.
And just a couple of final questions, some fun questions. Since we are on the topic of Spider-Man, I'll have to ask favorite Spider-Man villain?
Dr. Octopus, without a
Dr.
doubt.
Octopus.
Yeah, love
Favorite
him.
Spider-Man fight scene from any of the movies?
Oh, it's got to be the train sequence from part two. But starting before the train, starting at the top of the building, and when he catches the bit of the clock and throws it back up at him,
Yeah.
and then when they fight midair but land on the train, all of that's spectacular.
Yeah, that part, the train sequence is just still
Legendary.
as a New Yorker though, I'm watching, I'm like, where is this?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what location in
Well,
Manhattan?
it's Chicago is the
Yeah.
answer because it's where they filmed it. So,
And I'll have to say, your favorite Spider-Man actor.
it's Toby. I'm sorry. It's Andrew. It's
Andrew.
Andrew.
Okay.
Yes, I just threw people off. It's Andrew. But people constantly are asking like to compare the three, and I need people to understand that they really are like 1A, 1B, 1C. I don't.
Exactly.
They all bring something special to the table. But if I have to choose, Andrew's the best actor of the three. I believe he's the best actor of the three. His Peter is definitely different from the comics. He's not nerdy in any way, shape, or form.
No.
He's an outsider and he's aloof. But when he plays Grief, there's that montage at the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2 where he's standing at Gwen's grave and the seasons are passing. It's devastating, and he's not saying anything, and it's devastating. Tom got a scene like that in No Way Home with Favreau, and it looked like it was shot on a green screen. It didn't have the impact that I wanted it to have.
Yeah.
Andrew sells it. I think Tom's the best Spider-Man. I think he's benefited the most from the best visual effects, from the best suits. I think that he's, his work in Civil War is outstanding. Like seeing that Spider-Man fight alongside the Avengers is something I dreamed of seeing. Never thought I ever would get a chance to. His fight with Vulture outside the plane when he's in his makeshift, homemade sweatshirt suit is outstanding. And he gets the incredible, Magic of Mysterio sequence in the middle of Far From Home. Like he's great. He's great. So they're all great. They're all great. They're all great. But but for favorite, I'm going to say Andrew.
I'm gonna have to go. Like for me, I'm always a jug between Toby for pure nostalgic purposes.
Sure.
But when I started watching more of Andrew, and especially like when I watched No Way Home, and I actually liked the Amazing Spider-Man 2. A lot of people like, oh my god. I'm like, no, like you really look at that movie. Yeah, it has its problems with all the villain, like too much of the villains. I get that. But there is to me the most emotional depth Spider-Man movie, especially with Gwen's death. And my favorite scene is that ending where he's having that conversation with May, and May alludes like this is the scene where she subliminally tells him, I know you're Spider-Man, and that's when she's saying like, I'm gonna put Ben's stuff away, and I'm gonna move on. And that was like, okay, she knows exactly who he is. And that was just her way of kind of telling. And then, like you said, the ending with the kid, it like he has such that emotional depth. And then when we discussed earlier with No Way Home, he's carrying that grief. And I will say Tom, definitely with that grief, they were showing that in No Way Home. And Toby's kind of more of that older brother mentor, like, hey guys, we gotta reel it in. Got to stay focused. And I like how they had everything like that. It's like Toby's more of the mentor, Andrew's kind of the middle child. And then you have Tom being that young, the young one who's just really in grips of learning everything about what it means to be a Spider-Man. I thought it was just brilliant stuff.
But are you excited to see where Tom can go now that he's at the point where we love him? Like he's stripped of everything.
Yes.
He's just the friendly neighborhood
That was
Spider-Man.
one of my gripes. I'm not gonna lie. I did call him Iron Man Jr. as well. Like I'm watching the MC. I'm like, okay, he has to do something on his own. I was like, where's the stakes? Because I did like Homecoming. I did like Far From Home, but I was just like, I felt like there was no Spider-Man stakes. Like I was just like, where's that torment? Where is the responsibility? The choices affect everything. And then I was like, okay. Then I saw No Way Home, thinking I'm expecting the same thing. But then when I saw No Way Home and how dark it was, I was like, okay, now he's Spider-Man. He's finally Spider-Man.
There it is. Yes, there it is. There's the guy we've been waiting for.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, so my friend did break it down for me. He's like, this was an origin story without saying it was an origin story.
An origin trilogy. Yeah.
Yes.
Essentially. Yeah.
For him to be like the Spider-Man. And before we wrap it up, I'll have to say, just amazing book, Sean. Just throughout, man. Like it was such a pleasure to read. I'm gonna everybody has to definitely, if you're a Spider-Man fan, add this to your collection. It's such a well-detailed, well-written book on just the process of the films. Information I didn't even know, like I said, with the James Cameron organic Spider-Man, I didn't know that. Definitely pick this up. It's in Amazon's bookstores everywhere. Amazon
anywhere
bookstores,
you
right?
get books. Yep, anywhere you get books, you can find it, and it's called With Great Power. And thank you. So I really appreciate those kind words, man. It means everything to me that a fan like you enjoyed the story.
It's definitely. Where can viewers follow you if you have any social medias?
Well, Cinema Blend. I'm on Cinema Blend every single day. My social media is Sean_O'Connell, and then the book has a Twitter account as well too, called W Great Power Book, if you want to check that out as well.
Hey, everybody, check this out. And this is Justin and Sean O'Connell. Thank you for joining us here at Imaginative Visions and the Tacos of Geeks. We will catch everybody on the next one. Later days.
Thank you for joining us for Imaginative Visions Journeys. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from Imaginative Visions, you can visit imaginativevisions.com.